Hello viewers, welcome back to the last part of our series on when to trade pieces. The next factor to consider here is bishops of opposite color. Now, this is kind of a weird one in that if it's just bishops and pawns, then bishops of opposite color is super drawish. However, if there are more pieces on the board besides just bishops and pawns, then it's actually pretty good for the attacker. So I have some examples of both. Here I'm playing white way back in 2006. I'm still in the 1700s, and I'm suffering a bit here. So I'm down a pawn, and black's rook is active. I'm also tied down to the defense of h3. It's not looking good for white. But I got a very generous gift from my opponent. So black played knight c4, and then we just traded down into an opposite color bishop ending. I think we talked after the game, he kept trying to prove there's a win here, but these endings are so drawish that there really is no hope for black to prevail. These endings are actually so drawish that even if I lose my e4 pawn after I pick up d6, it's actually still a draw. So if you're winning, you should pretty much avoid opposite color bishop endings at almost any cost. Almost. There are some rare exceptions where you actually win them, but they're overwhelmingly drawish. Now, if you have more pieces than just bishops and pawns on the board, they're like rooks or something, or other pieces on the board, then these are actually often favoring the attacker. So if it's just bishops and pawns, then you have set a blockade in the squares to control the squares that you control. Like I control the dark squares here, so I set a blockade in the dark squares, and there's no way black can get through. If there are additional pieces on the board, though, then the side that's stronger can attack the squares that their bishop controls, and a defender's bishop can't fight back. So here's a nice example of trades where one player knew when to trade and the other one did not. In this game, I'm playing black. This is the 2019 Chicago Open. I'm 2100 and my opponent's in the 1900s. A lot of times, lower rated players are very eager to trade because they think that'll get them to a draw. But if they don't know when to trade, when not to trade, they often just march straight into some lost ending. And that's what ends up happening in this game. Trade based on what's going on the board. Don't trade based on your opponent's rating. Over here, white is better. So in the Benoni, which is what I am playing here, white gets a majority in the center, but black is hoping to get counterplay based on b5 or maybe even f5 sometimes and control the e5 square. Here, though, white still has more space and still has their pawn majority, but I haven't really managed to stir up much counterplay. But white, being very eager to trade, goes on a mission to exchange off my h5 knight. He played knight e2. There are several ways to do better, so what white could have done instead is play knight a4. White could also play g3, aiming to play f4 and grab some more territory. If I try to stop that by playing g5, then I've weakened my f5 square, so eventually white can play knight d1, knight e3, and the knight gets to f5, I'll be suffering a lot. I probably play something like bishop f6 and knight g7, but that looks pretty ugly. But white decided to trade off my knight, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a strategic standpoint. So I clamp down on f4. White insists on trading knight, so I take it. And now I go for the e5 square. So Now what we're thinking about is trying to open up the queen side, get my rook into the game by playing b5. And now it finally happens. White takes en passant. And now white rushes into an endgame, again being very eager to just trade pieces. So queen takes a6. But the problem with this trade, though, is, again, think about activity. So at the end of all these exchanges, my rook on b2 is very active. So not that long ago, black was worse and suffering. Now black is starting to think, maybe I got something here. Maybe I can start playing for a win even if all goes well. So white tries to trap the active rook, and that does make sense. The rook on e1 is passive, the rook on b2 is very much not passive, so trade it off. The problem is that I can just reinforce it with rook b8, and now I still have an active rook on b2. White played h3. Not especially logical move. I bring up my king, and now I'm thinking about moves like maybe even playing c4 someday. Probably not right away, the pawn would be kind of vulnerable out there, but I'm planting that seed and making that potential threat in the position. So white probably wanted to activate his rook by playing rook a1 and then doing something down here. The problem with rook a1 right now is that I just take an f3 a check, and then the bishop zaps the rook. So white avoids that tactic. Now I bring up my king. And now white makes another poor trade. He played bishop takes e5. Now if you could get rid of the rooks as well, then we're just an opposite color bishop ending with just bishops and pawns, and white should be able to hold that most likely. With the rook still on the board though, black still has chances to win. So I could try things like put my bishop on d4, king on e5, or possibly smash the center with f5 at the right moment. And because I still have a rook, I can break any blockades on the light squares, so you can't just blockade c4. The game actually ended quite quickly here, and white played bishop c4, and I played bishop f4. The rook can't hold both the c4 bishop and the back rank at the same time. So don't be overly eager to trade. If you have bishops opposite color, it's good for the attacker if there are other pieces on the board. If there are just bishops and pawns, it's very good for the defender. So these previous factors are ones that you might not have heard about before. Now I'll save the more obvious ones for last. So if your king's under attack, trade pieces. That gets rid of the attackers and saves the game in many cases. In this game, I'm playing black. This is in the Thanksgiving Open back in 2018 at the St. Louis Chess Club. My opponent is in the low 2400s, and I've been on defense for most of the game. So there's a lot of threats around my king, so the rook and the queen are eyeballing g7, so my knight's kind of stuck there. I also have to worry about things like bishop d5, pinning my queen to the king, which would just end the game instantly. So I'm in a bit of a tough situation here. So if you're on defense, try to trade pieces. So I played queen f7. This is actually not the most precise move. Later analysis demonstrated, but it does illustrate our theme well. So I'm threatening mate in f1, so white play bishop g2 to defend. And now I found a very nice move that is setting up knight to c6. So it does allow him to take my queen, but I'm hitting his queen and his rook. So it's going to force some exchanges. So he took my queen, I took his, and now the attack's over with. And we very soon end up agreeing to a draw. So all the pawns come off the board, and it's just completely dead equal. So by trading pieces at the right moment, I got myself out of a bad defensive situation. So another obvious tip you might have heard before is about space. So if you have a space advantage, avoid trades. If you have less space, try to seek out trades. So if you don't have much space, then your pieces kind of get in each other's way. So you trade off some of them, then they can flow more easily and not be blocking each other. In this position, I'm black. This is from the 2012 US Open. I was rated in the 1900s at the time, and I was playing against a 2100. You can see he's clearly outplayed me. I am way behind space and just in a lot of suffering. So because I have less space, I want to trade pieces here. So if I could open up the B file at the right moment and trade off a couple of rooks, then I might be able to survive. Obviously, I can't play pawn takes right now because I was just hanging a rook, so I got to do some preparation first. So I play knight back, and then I bring my rook up. So now I am ready to play b takes a5. White missed my idea and played bishop c2, and now I burst free. So white comes back, and we trade a pair of rooks, and I offer a trade of another pair of rooks. And now black's problems are much less severe than they were a few moves ago. With a couple of rooks off the board, black is much freer. And now, perhaps surprisingly, white is offering a trade of bishops. White still has more space, so why is white offering a trade? Well, this comes back to one of the points we made earlier. Think about, how does a trade affect my ability to control key squares? If I were to trade off his bishop, then my c6 square over here would be pretty vulnerable. I can easily imagine the queen coming to c6 and doing some serious damage to my position. So while in general I like trades when I have less space, I'm also thinking about control of key squares. So I actually avoided the trade and played knight to d7. I don't mind if his bishop comes into c6. I can withstand a bishop invasion. What I can't withstand is that trading bishops and then queen comes in. That might not be survivable. The computer tells me I think black can actually still live, but this just seems simpler. So he comes in and forces me back, and I retreat, and I regroup. Again, I might be surprised that white's offering a queen trade here, even though white has more space. This once again comes down to control of key squares. If I just trade queens and then knight takes, I can't defend d6. So I'm actually not in a position to make that trade. So I bring my king over and trade some pawns. And I get back my a5 pawn, but that's okay. The important thing is that now my pieces are starting to coordinate and I can defend. So I play queen b3, creating some counterplay. So now he has to retreat in order to stop me from penetrating. And I come back and the defenses hold. So white has to trade queens. There is no way out for white. So white tries to trade queens on more favorable terms. You can't think about who should be initiating the trade. And white plays queen b5. But I think about the same things. Who should be initiating this trade? If I just take it, then knight takes, d6 and a7 under attack. So I don't want to initiate the trade either. I want to force him to initiate the trade. So I played a6. And white is going through the same thought process. If white just trades queens, that activates my knight. So white does not want to let me activate my knight. White comes back to here and says, I'll make you trade queens. And if I say, okay, we'll trade queens. And my knight comes out, and we trade another pair of pieces. And now black is just fine. I still have less space, but with material so heavily reduced, that lack of space is no longer meaningful. My pieces are not cramped anymore. Actually, the only person who can think about winning here is black because I have this a-pawn. Unfortunately, though, the a-pawn is thoroughly blockaded, and I was not able to make anything happen here. Very last factor to think about with trades is material. So you guys probably know this all already, so that's why I saved it for the very end. The side that has more material should trade pieces but not pawns. the side with less material should trade pawns but not pieces. So just about any instructional book will probably talk about that somewhere. So I know a whole lot of examples for that. So anyways, that's my guide for thinking about trades. Hope you guys learned something, and I hope I inspired you to play better chess.